Guys, you know what isn't back? Star Wars. But is the tide turning against Star Wars? That's what I really want to know, right? Because, guys, let me see if I can bring this up. Dutch, is it ready?
Yeah, it should be.
All right.
Standing right next to me. There you go.
So, the shilliest of the shill media, IGN, came out with this terrible, awful, excoriating article that basically took Lucasfilm and its leadership to the woodshed. And when a shill publication like IGN starts turning against you, you know you got problems, or the checks have dried up, one of the two. But checks drying up are more problem than concern, probably. Anyway, guys, if you guys want to read the article, which I highly recommend you do, links to all this stuff that we're going to be talking about in today's show is in the description, so you can do your own research. But guys, when I was reading through this IGN article, I was flabbergasted at how hard this author went on Lucasfilm, in particular Kathleen Kennedy. Although they didn't really call out Kathleen Kennedy by name, but they did basically take Lucasfilm to the woodshed. And the whole idea behind this article, which is written by Carlos Morales, is basically that Lucasfilm has hurt the Star Wars brand so much that no one really cares about it anymore. But beyond that, they keep announcing stuff that never gets made, and so it's become less and less of an event. And it's really kind of interesting. In fact, Butters, can you call up the Villeneuve?
It's already there.
Thing.
Also, right. Tom's in the back.
Yes, I know.
Villeneuve.
He knows everything.
Villeneuve.
I see everything, Odin. So guys, I don't know if you know this, but Denis Villeneuve, the very French director of Dune, has basically come out publicly and said there are no good Star Wars movies past Empire Strikes Back, including Return of the Jedi, and that basically the Star Wars movies are so formulaic and dogmatic that any self-respecting filmmaker would never bother to make a Star Wars movie, simply because they don't have the freedom to do anything new or different or interesting, because basically you have to stick to what George Lucas set out to do, and you also have to listen to what Kathleen Kennedy wants you to do, and nobody likes that. Nobody wants to do that.
Well, they're doing a pretty shitty job of that.
They are indeed. But I'm going to bring Tom on because I want to hear his take. And Tom, please behave yourself. We do have a Goonie hater on the panel.
It's hard being
Tom
correct.
Connors. Yes. So Tom, I don't know if you got a chance to read this article, but when you lose IGN, the shilliest of the shill media, that's not a good sign. So what's your take on this?
My take is more about Villeneuve Favre going like, oh, Return of the Jedi sucks or whatever. It's like, yeah, it's not my favorite of the Star Wars movies, but did he watch the last half of his Dune movie?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I was like, talk about going off the rails there, buddy.
Jesus. The movie sucked.
You know what? I want to throw this.
And I said it the other day. I've been waiting to say this for years. Arrival sucked. The end is horrible. I'm sorry. It's a big 100%
cheat. Right, Tom.
Big cheat. Denny Villeneuve Vuva is a one-horse pony or one-trick pony. That's
I agree with everything you're saying.
He's an artiste.
I cry at that Arrival. I'll have you know.
He's just smelling his own farts over there.
He's definitely
on the camera and just beating off.
I want to throw this to Robert Meyer of the Burnett. Robert, you famously don't like Return of the Jedi, and I have to agree with you. I feel like of the original trilogy, it's the weakest, but it's also better than everything else that's come after it, which isn't saying much. But Star Wars basically has two good movies, and it's subsisted off of
I would say two great movies.
Yes, two great
movies. Two transcendent movies that set a very, very high bar.
So the big thing in this article talks about how Daisy Ridley is now the key to Star Wars on the big screen, and that all the new movies that are being developed are kind of centered around her, and yet they can't get any of these off the ground. And her latest movie, The New Jedi Order, is basically has been removed from the release schedule, which means that they've indefinitely suspended it. And when you compare that with something like Empire and the original Star Wars, it makes sense, because this article in particular talked about how the Rise of Skywalker was the thing that shit the bed so hard that made everybody just check out of Star Wars. And since then, they've just been maintaining stuff. So I want to hear your take on this. What do you think is the biggest problem facing Star Wars right now?
Well, if you go back and you look at the thing about Star Wars, and I just read an article, was it this morning? Star Wars was a collective effort by everybody that George Lucas got involved in the making of that film. And it defines the alchemy of the filmmaking process. Because George Lucas might have thought that he was, he wanted to get Flash Gordon, but he couldn't get the rights. So he wanted to do this, the space fantasy that was a throwback to the era of the movie serials. And he hired a bunch of counterculture adults to work with him. And none of those people thought they were making a kids movie. Gary Kurtz didn't think he was making a kids movie. His editor team of Paul Hirsch, Richard Chew, and Marshall Lucas didn't think they were making a kids movie. And the people at ILM were creating technology that didn't even exist. The special effects and the things that they were able to pull off in Star Wars had never been done before. The closest anyone came was 2001, and that was in the late 60s, and they didn't have motion control photography. I mean, when the Dextraflex camera was invented, and they could have a computer do passes, they could have dynamic movements, they could do all kinds of things that no one had ever seen before. George Lucas famously left LA or left California and went to Hawaii with Steven Spielberg because he thought Star Wars was such a disaster. He didn't know what he had. Because when he watched that movie, in his mind, he hadn't made what he wanted to make. And he might have wanted to make movies for kids or space fantasies for 12-year-olds to pick up, to become heroic. But that's not what Star Wars was. And I saw Star Wars opening weekend. Yeah, and it's hard to explain to people what it was like to see a movie that no one had ever seen anything remotely close to Star Wars. It didn't exist. And I mean, I had never seen in my life lines of people that stretched for city blocks in downtown Seattle to go see this movie. And the first time I tried to go see it, I didn't know there would be, I thought, it's a regular movie. I didn't know people would line up. I was crying because I couldn't get in. So my dad took me to a double feature of The Car and Race with the Devil, which was awesome, by the way. And then the next morning, I went with my neighbors to see it. And we went really, really early and got in. And it was the most mind-blowing thing I've ever seen in a movie theater. Because it was so far beyond. It was like somebody took my subconscious and threw it on the screen. And every single person, young, old, middle-aged, whatever, every single person in the world was enchanted by Star Wars. Every political cartoon in every newspaper in the op-ed section had Star Wars cartoons for months. It was a huge, game-changing, sea-changing effort of imagination that told people that movies could do things they'd never done before. And it really opened the floodgates that led to the next 5 years of fantasy film of all kinds. And when Empire came out, the expectations were, I was so worried it wasn't going to be good. I mean, because everybody I knew, everybody was a Star Wars fanatic. And when Empire came out, it was like, oh my God. And the thing, what Empire did was it added gravitas and it added importance. And because it is not a nice movie, it's a movie where everybody basically loses, and it ends on a moment of hope, but everybody is defeated. And so that was audacious as well. But again, you're seeing things, the whole attack at the beginning on Hoth, and seeing Luke get attacked by the Wampa, and going to Dagobah and meeting Yoda and training, and seeing what happened to Han and Luke, and the betrayal on Bespin and all that. It was amazing because it dealt with adult themes, and design work in Empire was the things that you saw. Oh, here's a Star Destroyer, but oh no, wait, here's one that's 20 times bigger. Here's an asteroid field. Here's twin pod cloud cars and Bespin and snow speeders and AT-ATs and ATSTs, and everything was new and amazing and crazy. So what it was doing was upping the ante. So the expectation was that Jedi was going to up the ante further. Now they were stuck because they had to deal with a side quest to go get Han Solo. Now, admittedly, for me, when I first saw Return of the Jedi, I knew from the opening scene we were in trouble. Because if you look at the acting, this is going to seem crazy to people, but when you look at the acting in the pilots and the people that are in the shuttle cockpit, they don't sound right. The voices were wrong. And I know it's a weird thing to say. It didn't. And then when Vader steps off the shuttle and starts talking, James Earl Jones's voice, Vader didn't sound right. They didn't do. And so I'm watching this movie. I'm like, and by the time you get to C-3PO knocking on the door of Jabba's palace, which is a horrible soundstage shot, you're going from this beautiful desert out exterior shot. You see Jabba's palace in the distance. The photography in Return of the Jedi is terrible. The lighting is terrible. And then the thing comes out, and then the Gamorrean guard comes out. The design of the Gamorrean guard's a cartoon. And suddenly you realize that I 5 minutes into that movie, when you get into Jabba's palace and you meet Cy Snoodles and Max Rebo and you see Wee Quay and all that, I was out. I'm like, this movie is wrong. Everything in it is wrong. And by the time you get to R2 and 3PO nose down or head down in the sand at Jabba's, the sail barge, and it's a painted backdrop, they're not even outside, and the magnets come down and pick them up out of the ground, I'm like, we're done. And it's a tonal issue that affects that movie. Now, here's the thing. The whole movie, what happens at the beginning, you got to get Han Solo, and what happens at the end, okay, you've got a perfunctory space battle with something they're going to blow up because they blew it up in a previous movie. So there's no threat there. The Death Star is no threat. And yeah, okay, he turns on the weapon and starts firing. It's one scene with 3 dudes in a room, and that's what makes the whole movie. So you have 2 scenes. The rest of the movie is entirely inconsequential. It doesn't matter. Who cares? And there's no real stakes because they're going to blow up the Death Star. The Emperor, if you watch, here's the thing that really bothers me. The Emperor has been changed in Empire Strikes Back. Clive Revel's voice, who was the Emperor, when you watched Empire Strikes Back for the very first time, and Vader takes his the executor out of the asteroids to contact the Emperor, and he kneels before the Emperor. Vader kneels. And the Emperor is not, take your Jedi weapon, strike me down. Ha, ha, ha. I look like the witch from Snow White. The Emperor was like this. And Vader's like talking about going to get Skywalker. And the Emperor's like, yes. If he could be turned, he would be a valuable asset. The Emperor is scary AF in that movie. He is somebody, because he's quiet and contemplative. And this guy who's he terrifies Vader. And then the first time we see him in Jedi, he's coming down the ramp. And look, I like Ian McDermott, but he looks like the witch in Snow White. And when you see that in Return of the Jedi, I'm watching this and I'm like, again, I've already suffered through Jabba's palace of Muppets, which I hated the designs of every one of them because they didn't look real. All the aliens in Star Wars and Empire I bought into. I don't believe Jabba's palace. I don't believe that those creatures, when you're watching Cy Snoodles sing, that was such a stupid design. And you're looking at it and I'm just like,
I got a question for you, Robert.
I'm telling you why I hate Return of the Jedi.
But you're how old are you? You're a couple of years older than me, I think.
I was 16 when I saw Jedi.
Okay, so I was 13. And I personally didn't have any huge issues with the characters in the show until we got to Endor with the little Muppets or with the Ewoks.
Well, yeah,
the Ewoks took me out of the show more than.
But it's not even
the other things.
Well, Robert, we don't have 1,000 minutes to go through all this stuff.
But can I just say one more thing?
Make your point, and I'm going to go to Odin.
The gags that they set up for the Ewoks to defeat the Empire completely discredit. They're right out of a cartoon. And they completely discredit. You can't discredit the Empire as a fighting force. And once you've seen the entire Ewok sequence and Ewoks somehow can hang glide, the Empire is no longer a threat. And you're watching this, and it's like, well, that's you've completely eliminated. They can be defeated, and that was really the problem with that whole film, is that it defanged the Empire.
And I think that Return of the Jedi was the beginning of the end for the franchise because all the movies just kind of went downhill from there. I know there are people who like the prequels, but come on, give me a break. Anyway, Odin of OMB Reviews. One of the interesting things in this article was they talked about how Solo was like the catalyst for taking Star Wars off the big screen because it was by all measures a failure. But they also mentioned that if Kathleen Kennedy hadn't been so incompetent and they didn't have to reshoot that movie twice, it would have just been like a middling like performer. You know, it wouldn't have been like this big box office failure. And then they could have just gone on doing other middling Star Wars movies. So I want to get your take on this, because the whole psychology behind taking Star Wars off the big screen wasn't only just to focus on, you know, the Star Wars TV shows, but it was also to give them time to kind of reorient and re-strategize their theatrical release strategy. But their strategy now seems to be to announce new movies and then never make them. So what's your take on this?
I think that it's somewhat correct to point out a film like Solo being kind of the starting point, not necessarily from our view, right? For us to pay attention, and you know, some people saw the issues from Force Awakens. Some people really started to see the issues when it came to like The Last Jedi, for instance. But I think that from like a public perception focus, you could absolutely point to that movie. And the reason why is because that, to me, is when it started to be shown without a shadow of a doubt that the Emperor had no clothes. That clearly they had gotten very lucky with a film like The Force Awakens, because they had all that buildup, they had all that anticipation, they had so much, you know, riding on it, and the film itself ended up being a very middling movie, right? And so because of that, it was able to, with everything else built up around it, be a huge financial success for them. The problem, though, was that it really didn't set up anything interesting, and the things that it did set up were very quickly done away with the very next movie in 2017. With Solo, though, that's when you really started to see just how bad things were as far as the persons that the reins were handed over to. Because you saw in Solo a movie get, 75+% of the way through shooting, and then Kathleen Kennedy comes in, fires the directors, hires somebody new, brings reshoot a huge portion of the movie, and the budget just goes skyrocketing. And so that gets put on display. The fact that Kathleen Kennedy cannot manage anybody. Like, she is terrible at mismanage. She is so bad at management, and not only that, but also she has a money spending problem, and she has no creative ideas whatsoever. Right? That really, I think, became exposed with that nonsense. And what's happened every single project since then, basically rinse and repeat. Like, unless you've actually been able to bring in someone like a Rian Johnson, where clearly he is on the same wavelength as her and is willing to do whatever the hell she wants him to do, right? That's the only time any of the creative persons actually got in line and got along with her, ultimately. And so I think that there's absolutely a lot of correctness to say there, but also to say that, oh, it would have done fine had they not had all of the extra money spent, I don't think is true, because that's a movie that still made around $400 or so million worldwide. And even if you cut that budget by even just a little bit, like I was pulling up my old chart of Solo, and it ended up costing $270 million to make. I mean, even if you cut off $100 million from that, you're still at like $100+ million loss. So I just, to say that is a bit too far. But absolutely, I think that calling out Solo as kind of like that point where people start to realize the Emperor has no clothes, that Kathleen Kennedy is a hack when it comes to anything creative, but also management. I think that became evidently clear.
And Brian, one of the interesting things in this article as well is the fact that they said, okay, they're announcing all these movies. There doesn't seem to be a plan in place. Whichever one gets done first is like, you know, the thing that's going to go. But it's obvious that Daisy Ridley's first movie by Sinead Obat Choi, whatever her name is not going forward. It's gotten pulled from the schedule. But then they come out and announce that they're handing the keys over to Simon Kinberg, the architect behind the Dark Phoenix X-Men movies. And he's saying, like, not only is this a bad idea, but it's also something where in 6 months down the line, they're probably going to announce that's not going any further either. So what do you think about this idea that not only can Lucasfilm not get a Star Wars movie going, but the fact that they keep hiring the worst possible people to make them?
Yeah, I don't know if they're hiring those, like, if they're hiring the worst people, or they're hiring people that are going to try to toe the line and do what they say. Like, maybe you don't want to hire
the same.
Right, you're probably right. Yeah, I think the fact is, like, they don't want to hire someone that is strong-willed and probably very creative, because then they're going to push back against whatever crazy bad story ideas they have, or whatever message they're trying to inject into the story. And I think that goes for a lot of studios do that, but like in particular, we're seeing that a lot with Star Wars.
And Dutch, your take on this? Do you think Star Wars is ever going to get a movie off the ground?
No, I feel like we've had this conversation like at least a dozen times before. And no, I don't think we're going to get any good Star Wars for a while, not at least until they have a house cleaning there at Lucasfilm. You know, they're not interested in changing their ideology or anything over there. So Until that happens, they're just going to keep trying to bring in people who will toe the line and tell their silly little stories that nobody wants to see. And if they do manage to get one out, it'll probably do solo numbers. There's going to be that 5% of shilly fans that are going to like soak up and absorb anything that they get fed to them, and the rest of us will be out here, trying to speak some truth. So,
And what surprises me, Dutch, is that in this article itself, you have IGN basically saying the same thing you did. It's like, until the leadership at Lucasfilm changes, Star Wars is basically dead. And so, like, Tom and Rob, I want to get your guys' take on this real quick before we move on. It's like, when you have IGN of all publications calling for leadership change in Lucasfilm, what does that tell you?
Well, I mean, just the mainstream media has kind of, they can't keep up the charade any longer, basically. I mean, it's clearly, I would go as far back as The Last Jedi. I'd say Solo was a result of how bad The Last Jedi was, because if you look at the box office, going off of what Odin had said, I mean, the box office on The Last Jedi was roughly a half of what The Force Awakens was. And we all knew it was going to have a little bit of a downturn just because of the hype that went into The Force Awakens. But we kind of started noticing about roughly, a week or so after the movie came out, more and more people were like, yeah, just something's not right about this movie, to the point where people are just flat out hating it. And Solo totally bit the dust, and Palpatine came back somehow, and when nobody cared, and since then, it's been
somehow
just
he
garbage.
returned.
Yeah, somehow they literally say that in the movie. Somehow he returned. It's like, okay, JJ. Yeah. Anyway, but like I said, the best thing about The Rise of Palpatine was it was the world's most expensive Twitter war between directors. That was the most hilarious thing about it. But other than that, like, we have been sitting here admiring in this garbage for what now? 5-6 years. And the only good thing we've gotten out of it was Mandalorian, and that was roughly 2 seasons of that.
And Rob, when you lose IGN, have you really lost everyone?
Yeah, well, it's got 7 out of 7, I thought.
I mean, look, I've always believed that every franchise, every IP is one great movie away from being resuscitated, but the problem is, and I think it's not Kathleen Kennedy that's the real problem here, it's Disney. I mean, Disney has a very narrow window of what they're going to allow. And I think that, look, I hated The Force Awakens. I hated The Force Awakens for being a film that, if you're a kid growing up, here's what I don't understand about the entire way Star Wars, the resurrection of Star Wars, was handled after Disney bought it. If you're making a film and you are making it as episode 7 of now a 9-episode series, and the last film, the previous film, ends with your heroes after 6 films vanquishing evil from the galaxy. Luke is now a Jedi. Vader's soul was redeemed in the Force. The Empire is defeated. And the next movie you make basically resets the galaxy to the way it was when the first Star Wars movie that ever came out, the first Star Wars, has been recreated to start again from scratch, to redo Star Wars, to give you a new pantheon of heroes. You've made a grievous error, because you can't call something episode 7 and then just reboot it from the beginning and not explain. Like, imagine what a kid who's discovering Star Wars first winds up with when, he's 6 years old, 7 years old, watching with his dad, and you finish Return of the Jedi and you immediately throw in The Force Awakens. Imagine the shock that kid's going to have when, wait a minute, where's Luke Skywalker? He just became a Jedi. And now you see him at the end of the movie living as a hermit. Why is there a bunch of evil First Order people here? Why did our heroes in the last movie suddenly, they've just jumped over whatever happened, and the galaxy has been rebooted to where it was in the first movie I watched, or not, episode 4. It was from the get-go horribly conceived. And the problem is, all of Star Wars fans who had been reading the expanded universe books and had been replaying the video games, they all had better stories in their minds that they'd experienced than Disney gave us. Now, The Force Awakens made $2 billion, so you can say, well, Rob, but that movie, you could have put an X-Wing, a still frame of an X-Wing on screen and have music playing, and people would have gone to see it. People were everybody loves Star Wars. We want to love Star Wars. The world went to see Star Wars again. And what Disney's mandate was, we got to reboot Star Wars so it's ours. We have
I
to
think
make
you
sure.
said something very important there, Robert, real quick, if I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the whole thing about liking Star Wars. We wanted to like Star Wars, right? But
Everybody wants to like Star
They're
Wars.
acting like we want to do nothing but hate it. That's what pisses me off. It's like, no, this passion comes out of a love for the franchise. I just wanted to say that was
No,
very
and
important you pointed that.
no, and I think, and the thing is, we all go into these. We all watch these shows. We've got another show that in a few days dropping, Skeleton Crew. Has anyone reviewed it yet? I haven't read a review of it. I haven't seen. We've got a show
Well,
that
I mean, Rob, it's Star Wars version of Goonies.
I know
so
it is, and it takes
know
place
you're
in
gonna
like
hate it.
suburbia, Star Wars suburbia. But look, I will give it a chance. I will go in with an open mind, and I hope Skeleton Crew is good.